Hi, so I thought I would make a video about spirituality and how I consider myself spiritual and am I spiritual? So I think, sometimes people would ask, are you spiritual? And I usually say yes or yes a little bit. Or sometimes I have to fill in some um, questionnaire online, for example, and there's a question, do you consider yourself spiritual or are you spiritual? And I would always put yes or somewhat or something like that. But it's like I have to think about what that means. So I think a lot of people would consider spirituality to do with religion. So I'm not religious. I've never really been religious. But, I use astrology as a way of thinking or as a way of understanding and getting awareness around certain things, at least to a certain degree. I feel like I'm not as um, deep into astrology or as competent with astrology or as um, connected to astrology as I presume a lot of people who are doing astrology in some form. But I like to use it in the way that I know how, or I like to connect to it in my own way. And I like to share thoughts about astrology, which is largely what I've done on this channel. So I think because I've been interested in astrology for so long, it's something that's been with me on some level since I was a kid. It was kind of talked about around the house and things like that. I think because of that, um, astrology is a spiritual thing. Um, at least if you look at it a certain way. So I think because of that, I do consider myself spiritual, and not just because of that, but I think spirituality is something that is a little bit vague sometimes to think about. Like, what is spirituality? What counts as spiritual? What does not count as spiritual? I think everybody could be spiritual in some level. I think we are spiritual beings, just as a thing itself. I think we are spiritual beings, but I think because of astrology, I would always consider myself spiritual on some level because of that, and for other reasons as well. But I think I'm always trying to understand things. I'm always trying to like see what's behind things, and to ideally I want to connect with things. And that's why I'm kind of frustrated at times when I don't understand a particular astrological symbolism, or I can't feel into a certain astrological transit that I've got going on, for example. And it's like I want to get inside it and I want to feel it. And that doesn't always happen, which can be frustrating. Like, I don't always understand what a transit or an aspect really means to me. And I think that's something with astrology as well, is that we do all have a personal, those of us who are interested in astrology, we all have a personal relationship to it in some way. So some people are use it as, you know, as a hobby. Some people are use it as, or have it as a job or a career. Some people, just are more interested in the relationship aspect of it, like synastry or composite or something like that. Other people are more interested in transits. There's all these different levels and different ways of doing astrology. Um, and I think like I'm always trying to get inside it more. Um, and it doesn't always work. But when it does work, it feels fulfilling. It feels like there's something that I'm tapping into that is spiritual in on one level. On one hand, it is kind of spiritual. It's like I'm connecting to that spiritual being that I am and that other people are in my eyes, so that I'm understanding their spirituality better through the astrology, if that makes sense. So It's like I'm understanding almost what their agenda it was coming into this life. When I understand someone's astrology better, it's like I understand, oh, that's what that means. Like that's the spiritual meaning of that aspect, so, or that transit. So it's like it's almost like I'm understanding what they're doing in this life because they have this aspect or because they're going through a transit or something like that. Um, so I think because we are spiritual beings in my eyes, astrology is like a map of our spirituality almost. And it's also a map of just our humanity in a way and just our day to day life in a way. You know, it can have to do with that as well. But I think if we're talking about spirituality, part of astrology for me is that it helps me understand uh, like almost the soul agenda, if you want to call it that, or the spiritual agenda that the person is having in this life. And a lot of the astrological content that I like to follow a lot is to do with transits and understanding the purpose of them. And that is something that kind of gives me a little bit of almost like relief. It's like a comfort to know that there's actually a meaning to the things that I'm going through and the things that other people are going through. And it's something that I can see through the transits. And even when I don't get super connected to uh, the meaning of the transit, it's I can still get a glimpse into what it might mean when I just look at the planets involved or the points involved in the transit. So I think it is a way of tapping into like, oh, like that is what I'm doing at this time, or like this is like what's underneath what's going on in my life. So if I have a transit going on, for example, uh, like okay, I have Pluto square Moon kind of going on or about to start. So Pluto is currently at the end of Capricorn. So when it goes back into Aquarius again, it will definitely be squaring my Moon because my Moon is well, it's kind of like at the beginning points. In kind of in the beginning points of having Pluto squaring my Moon. Currently, it's a few degrees away, and it's not squaring by sign currently because Pluto has retrograded back into Capricorn, but it will go into Aquarius again, and my Moon is at 3 degrees of Scorpio, so Pluto will be squaring my Moon then, and it's like I look at like what that might mean or symbolize. So I'm already feeling like the beginnings of that, and it'd be interesting to see what comes of it or what insights I might have into what is going on in me or in my life, with that transit in particular and other transits. But I just find that one in particular very interesting. So I think the transits are a way, I'm kind of going off track, but the transits are a way for me to understand the what I like to think of as the meaning of what is going on. So I think in one level that on one level that is spiritual, that it's like our spiritual agenda or our soul agenda is seen through the transits, like what is physically happening has an underlying meaning. I just like to think of it that way. In a way it is comforting, like I already said, it's like a comfort, it's like a sense of relief that there is like a pattern. There's like a sense of comforting patterns to know that there is actually a meaning and a pattern to these things. It's not just kind of um, it's not necessarily if you like to think of it in these terms. It's almost like it's not that things are just thrown at us. It's that there's a meaning and there's a spiritual agenda and there's patterns. There's a specific wave of patterns that are happening with the transits, and they're happening for a reason. So that's the astrology part. I was just going to talk about my experience with spirituality. I got into a whole conversation about transits, but there we go. I want to also mention about things like meditation. So I think for me, a lot of spirituality is, I'm still I'm interested in kind of spiritual things to a certain degree, but I do like the idea of there being like a practical application or something that works for me practically. And I think with meditation, for example, some people might even think of meditation as this kind of spiritual woo-woo thing. But for me, especially when I was meditating more frequently, right now I'm just doing it occasionally. It is not just spiritual for me. It's not really what I would consider very spiritual in my life, but it's more like a way of relaxing, or it's a way of calming myself down. And I know that there is a spiritual component to meditation, and there's a spiritual component to being calm. So you could think of it as spiritual in that way, but just me personally, I don't consider it super spiritual in the way that I would think of it or approach it. But I know that there is a spiritual element to it still. And I burn incense, and I was actually kind of inspired to make this video because I'm burning incense right now, and I wanted to talk about incense, but I wouldn't be able to make a whole video about incense, I think. Um, but I think with incense, for example, that also has a spiritual element to it. But it's like I'm more interested in uh, like what other benefits does it have? So sometimes I Google, and I was just Googling that earlier. I was reading about the benefits of incense and the list of benefits of incense. And what actually draws me to incense most is the scent. But I was looking at, how incense can benefit us in other ways, and there was a lot of articles that talk about how, it does have an impact on your mood, potentially at least, on your um for example, anxiety. Just it can calm you. And so that also can be something that would draw me in future to burning more incense. um, but it's like my spiritual habits are not always rooted in spirituality. So I started burning incense mostly because I like the scent, and I like just the action of burning incense. I just like it. It just seems like a thing to do that feels somehow enriching. It like enriches the atmosphere, the environment, my day. But I don't go super deep into the spirituality of it. And so if I'm talking about in this video about how spiritual am I think those are some of the themes that would come up. So astrology, meditation, incense, and it's like I always have to think about like what does spirituality really mean, and how spiritual am I? I would always answer yes to questions like, are you spiritual? Because of those things and other reasons as well. But I have a hard time thinking of myself as highly spiritual, or spiritual in a way that I feel that I'm really tapped into other um, elements of spirituality. So I think I am tapped into astrology to a certain degree quite well, but I feel like I could always go deeper, and I would always go further with that. Um, but it's like for me with astrology, for example, I am interested in understanding it on a logical way, in a logical way, and also in a practical way to apply it in some ways would be the ideal for me. But I think that I think in some ways I really am attracted also to the spiritual element of astrology, just because it gives me a sense of comfort and relief that that there is a theme to these things, and there's a pattern, like I already talked about with the transits. Like there's a pattern, and there it seems to be there's a reason for things, and it's not necessarily something that we can prove, but we can sort of feel it in our lives, right? So I think to be aware of something, like a transit, to, first of all, to see what it is, what planets are in the transit, and then to kind of figure out the meaning of it, can just bring a sense of comfort, which is something that I just can't fully explain or understand. Because on one level, astrology and transits is like, well, I already know what's going on in my life, so I don't need to necessarily know what transits are going on. But knowing that they're going on, and then seeing the connection between them and what's actually going on in my life, makes me have a sense of comfort. There's like, it's like maybe it is that my spiritual side is waking up, or my soul agenda is being focused on when I'm focusing on transits, if that makes sense. So it's like maybe there is a part of me, and all of us, that is just the spiritual being in a human body. And so when we see transits, or when we see transits happening in our lives, when we read about transits, when we notice patterns and transits going on, maybe that is the spiritual side of us that is like being awakened, or something like that. It's like we're tapping into that intuitive side and that spiritual side, because there's also a lot of intuition with astrology, but that's kind of a separate thing. So I just wanted to make a video about spirituality in general, and how spiritual I consider myself, some of my thoughts about spirituality that I have at this moment. I think for me, I'll just finish with this point, is that for me, like I already said, it's like I would like there to be a practical element to it to some degree, or I would like it to at least only go as far as it still resonates with me, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't want to take it to a place where it doesn't resonate. And I think that's something that's important to notice in yourself as well, is when something resonates with you and when something doesn't resonate with you, or when you're not sure about something. So it's like it's just, it's more useful and potentially practical if you are resonating with what is being said or what is being brought up when it comes to spirituality. So I forgot to mention tarot cards. Um, I've used tarot cards before. I don't regularly use them. I think for me, I have a hard time really tapping into tarot as well as I would like to. I think there is an element of tarot that can give you uh, advice or thoughts about things that you already knew. So it can make, because it can make you, you know, connect different dots, and then you can see like, wow, well maybe that is what I want to do, or maybe that is what I should do. But I would never want to let the cards dictate what I'm doing. But I think tarot can be useful in this. This is what the only conclusion that I've come to about tarot really, is that it is useful only as insofar as you are awakened to your own um, wants and needs and desires and intuitions. So it's like I wouldn't want to let the cards dictate what I'm doing. But if it makes me think about something in a way that I didn't think of before, that is useful, if I see a card or list of cards on the table, it might make me think about something and connect the dots in a way that is actually useful. But if it doesn't resonate, then it's not so useful. So this video is much longer than I thought it would be, but I hope it was interesting for somebody. If you'd like more content from me, do subscribe and leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching.